Hello, I'm Lanisha DeBartoleben, President and CEO of the Northwest African American Museum. We would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present, and to honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish people. We would like to also honor the Coast Salish people of this region. We at the Northwest African American Museum acknowledge that we are on the unceded ancestral lands of a people who are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. Thank you all for joining us today. We are delighted to culminate NAM's month-long celebration of Black voices, and today feature two of the most thoughtful voices when it comes to Black futures. One is a writer who educates. The other is an educator who writes. And together, they are a phenomenal duo for today's Black History Month finale program. We will hear from award-winning author Rochelle Riley, and this conversation will be moderated by award-winning educational administrator Brenda of the Seattle Girls School. Both of these influential Black women are mentoring the next generation of leaders and activists. They both have a deeply rooted passion for young people, for nurturing them, believing in them, giving them both roots and wings. Today's program is about using Black history to build a strong Black future. Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who established Negro History Week in 1926, which would later become Black History Month, once said, quote, "What we are merely taught seldom nourishes the mind like that we teach ourselves," unquote. Rochelle Riley's new book, That They Lived, African Americans Who Changed the World, is all about that which we teach ourselves. We are fortunate to have here with us today Rochelle Riley from Detroit, Michigan. And to moderate today's program, we are equally grateful to have with us Brenda Leaks. Brenda is an influential thought leader on educational equity, youth development, and family wellness. Brenda is the head of school at Seattle Girls School, where she spends her days helping girls and gender non binary students find their voices. With a bachelor's degree in Spanish and secondary education from Notre Dame of Maryland University, and a master's degree in private school educational leadership from Columbia University of New York. Brenda has worked in independent middle schools across the country. She leads with a heart and a passion for people. And we are so grateful and so honored here at the Northwest African American Museum to have her with us and to be in partnership with Seattle Girls School. Please enjoy today's program. It is all about building a stronger future for all of us. Thank you for being with us, and let's now hear from Brenda Leaks.
Anita, thank you so much. My heart is like beating so fast at that introduction. It's amazing, you know, in the spirit of why we're gathered here today, to hear you describe me as a writer. I'm like, yes, I do write, but I've never thought of myself that way. I just wanted to acknowledge that as the power of how and why we're called together today to think about how we tell our own stories and how we claim the power that's within us. So thank you for that introduction. And thank you to NAM for creating so many opportunities for our community to learn and celebrate together during this Black History Month. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm so honored to be asked to introduce such a powerful book that tells so many important stories. I'm also grateful. This book has already helped me make connections to so many parts of my life. I'm grateful as a mother. I bought a copy of the book for my son, and I asked him to read one story every day. Without fail, every day he would run into my room and ask, "Mom, did you know?" Followed by something he picked up from one of the stories. What was amazing to me was that he honed in on the parts of the story that were related to these Black change makers when they were kids. "Did you know, Mom, that Aretha Franklin had a baby when she was 13 and kept on singing? Did you know that Muhammad Ali's bike was stolen when he was 12 and that's why he learned to box? Mom, did you know that Frederick Douglass taught himself how to read as a slave?" Even knowing who they would go on to become, those stories spoke to him because they connected him to who each person was when they were kids, just like him. I'm also grateful as a daughter. When I started reading the book, I was catapulted back to my own youth and the many biographies and autobiographies that my mother had me read. I also sent her a copy of the book. She was so moved when she started reading the stories. She said, quote, "This book is so important. What a great idea for our young people to give them confidence and courage to see everything they can become. It is a blessing for their souls," end quote. I realized that the books I read when I was young had plenty of information, but they were sorely lacking the inspiration that is in every page of this book. I am grateful as an educator. I became a teacher because people believed in me. They believed I could excel in high school and then be the first person in my family to graduate from college. They believed I could connect kids and help them see the potential that they have within themselves to be change agents in the world. They believed that I could be a leader in a field that is dominated by white men. But our youth today, they aren't getting those same empowering messages of belief in who they are. It's overwhelming to witness how many negative intersections are impacting their lives every day. Underfunded and inequitable education systems, food and housing insecurity, police brutality, the school to prison pipeline, and a lack of rich employment opportunities. The impact and trauma of systemic racism runs deep, and our kids are managing higher than ever rates of depression and anxiety. There are so many schools and community partners like NAM that are striving to help our young people see the potential they have to improve their own lives and the lives of the communities they call home. I believe in them. NAM believes in them. Rochelle Riley and Christy Smith Jones believe in them. That is one of the key messages of this book. No matter what obstacles you have to overcome, you can write your own story. Our youth need stories written just like the ones in this book to help them hold on to a sense of hope for their own futures. Lastly, I'm grateful as a Black woman. I had this kind of surprising moment as I was reading the book where I paused and I couldn't help but think about my own story and the story of my own life, the messages that it sends to my son and to the students I teach. I don't know that there will ever be a Black little girl who dresses up like me in the future, although she'd be pretty cute. But we don't need a nation of youth to know our stories in order for those stories to be impactful, in order for them to matter to the people we interact with on a day-to-day basis. And it's important for us to remember that too. Each of our stories can be inspiring to someone. So as I introduce the author, I want to start with a deep and heartfelt thank you. Christy Smith Jones, thank you. You had the idea to help your daughter connect to famous Black history makers by having her dress up like them, and you made that idea a reality. Rochelle Riley, thank you for being inspired by Christy and Lola's story and writing the words that would go on to inspire the rest of us. Rochelle has been inspiring her community with her words and her deeds for decades. She ended a nearly 20-year career as a nationally syndicated, award-winning Detroit columnist in 2019 to become the city's Director of Arts and Culture. In that role, she guides the city's investment in the arts and creates opportunities for transformative innovation. Her most recent project was the nation's first citywide memorial to victims of COVID-19. 15 funeral processions that circled the city's Belle Isle past 907 photo billboards of victims. As an author, essayist, and arts advocate, Rochelle travels the country, hosting conversations about the burden that America still bears by refusing to deal with the aftermath of American enslavement. She was just appointed to co-chair Governor Gretchen Whitmer's Black Leadership Advisory Council. She makes frequent television and radio appearances. She was a 2016 inductee into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame and a 2019 inductee into the North Carolina Media and Journalism Hall of Fame. She received the 2017 Ida B. Wells Award from the National Association of Black Journalists for her outstanding efforts to make newsrooms and news coverage more accurately reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. And she received the 2018 Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of Professional Journalists. She is also co-founder of Letters to Black Girls, an initiative to give letters of advice and encouragement from women across the country to girls across the country. In her own words, she says that she is a writer by trade and a warrior by necessity, and she is fighting for our children. Please welcome Rochelle Riley.
Thank you so very much, Brenda. That was amazing. And I can't wait to meet your mom because I love her words about my book. I'd like to thank the Northwest African American Museum and Lanisha DeBartoleben for this a wonderful invitation to my friends and future friends and all of the residents of Seattle and its area. I have been on a 15-year mission to change the way that we teach young people, all young people, about Black history. I want us to get to the point where we are not looking at the amazing accomplishments of iconic Black Americans as posters during Black History Month, but they're incorporated and a part of American history all year, that every child learns about these things. But I was so moved, literally, Black History Month of 2017, I was working on my book, The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery. And it literally was just a response to someone saying, Black people need to get over slavery. It happened a long time ago. Black people are better off than if they, had been left in Africa. And this was written by a columnist for the major Pittsburgh newspaper, which let me know two things. One, he'd never been to Africa, and two, he didn't know any Black people. So I wrote a Facebook post because, of course, I couldn't write a column because, First Amendment, everybody has the right as a columnist to write what they want, even if it's wrong. But I wrote a Facebook post that got such a response that I decided I would do this book and create this chorus of voices, to explain why slavery, enslavement still impacts folks. And the most heartbreaking and telling thing about it is I got 23 essays from 23 writers, and none of them focused on the same issue. I didn't have to call back one person and say somebody else wrote about that. So that February of 2017, as I was working on The Burden, I happened to literally, I'm always on social media, go to social media where I found photos that blew me away. There was Daisy Bates, the amazing journalist and activist who was the mentor to the Little Rock Nine, those 9 students who desegregated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I thought, who is this child who has just literally embodied, not just in costume and makeup, but the spirit of Daisy Bates? And then I saw Nikki Giovanni, and I looked at the aloof genius that this kid, 5-year-old Lola, Christy Smith Jones' daughter, was able to capture about my favorite poet. And there was Maya Angelou, literally explaining that history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And I said, okay, I need to find this woman. And I went on Facebook and I found her. And I said, Christy, you don't know me, but these pictures that you have done of your daughter are amazing. Can you talk to me about, what it was? And this was, of course, in February of 2018. The Burden had just come out. She had done it for a second time. And she was stunned that I called, and she thanked me, but she wasn't interested in like any big deal. And I said, no, no, no. These pictures are worth 1,000 words, and I've got 1,000 words for them. I'd like to write some inspirational biographical essays to go with these pictures. And she said, oh, no, I don't think so. So undaunted, I got on a plane. I flew to Seattle. I got in a car and I drove to Kent outside of Seattle. I took Christy and her family to lunch and finally convinced her that we should do this. And thank God we did, because for me, all I keep reminding myself of is, what if America had taught all children all these centuries about the accomplishments, the inventions, the impact, the genius of African Americans? First, little white kids would not grow up to be white adults who thought that African Americans were only descendants of the enslaved. But more importantly, little African American kids would not believe that they were only the descendants of the enslaved. They would learn things, and people like Bessie Coleman, who was the first Black female aviator and had to go to France to learn how to fly because she couldn't do it in the United States. Or Jackie Robinson, each of these stories that I wrote, I did a year's worth of research to find things from their childhoods that mattered so that each essay could be written beginning with this moment in their childhood that defined their lives. For Jackie Robinson, when he was 16 years old, he was in a gang. For him to turn away from that life and turn to football and then baseball and track, he lettered in all 3 sports, and of course, desegregated the Major League Baseball in the modern era. And Rosa Parks, everyone knows the story of Rosa Parks, but what people don't really know is that Rosa Parks' family had to move so that she could get the education that she needed. And she was a civil rights activist. She didn't happen to be a seamstress who happened to be sick of being pushed around. She and several women in the civil rights movement attempted to desegregate the bus system, which of course forced Black people to sit at the back of the bus or stand so that white people could sit at the front of the bus. So when she refused to get up that day, she literally ignited a bus boycott that lasted a year and crippled the system and changed the system. But people also need to know that Claudette Colvin, who was 15 when she decided not to give up her seat for a white man, was the reason that there was a lawsuit. It was her name on the lawsuit that actually outlawed segregated buses. Kids need to know that. They need to know that she was 15 when she did that. Frederick Douglass. So I have to tell you about these 2 kids. Lola, who was amazing every Black History Month in these photos, her mom worked with her for a long time, and she was just genius in the way she captured again, not just the look and feel, but the spirit of those women. So when I told Christy that I wanted to do the book and she finally consented, and I said, well, that's great. That's Black women. So now we need to do one with Black men. We need to do one with Black scientists. We need to do one with Black businessmen. We need to do one with Black musicians. We can do a whole encyclopedia. And she said, oh, we're not doing that. And I said, Christy, she said, nope, we're just going to do one book. I said, okay, if we're only going to do one book, we have to do one that speaks to Black boys and Black men. And she said, well, then we have to find a boy. And I said, I've got a boy. So I flew to Dallas and I got my grandson, Caleb, and he became Frederick Douglass. And by the way, he loved the hair. He wanted to go to the movies in this hair. I finally convinced him not to, and he went as Thurgood Marshall. But so now we had women and men. And again, it wasn't just the costumes, which Christy was genius in finding, the glasses, the wigs, the makeup. It wasn't just the photography, although Christy, who was a self-taught photographer, did an amazing job. It was the way these two children embodied these characters, these icons, these real people who changed the world. Look at Shirley Chisholm, who is one of my favorites, unbought and unbossed. It is not that Lola looks like Shirley Chisholm or is looking out like Shirley Chisholm did. Look at how she squares her shoulders. Like, I know who I am and how bad I am, which is why I can run for president and be the first African-American woman in Congress. And I could not stop smiling near tears when we told Caleb the story of Duke Ellington, Edward Kennedy Ellington, who literally at 15 was a soda jerk at a soda fountain when he wrote Soda Fountain Rag, his first composition, 15 years old, and he did it without knowing how to read or write music. But he had found his path to becoming one of the fathers of American jazz. Caleb took that story in, he sat down at the piano, and when he did this, you know, Christy and I were like, elbowing each other like, oh my God, oh my God. Then we said, oh no, take the picture. They just mesmerized us. And I want every kid to understand two things, that every important person, every famous person, everybody who ever accomplished anything was once a child. And you as a child can make those decisions, can find that moment that can change you. Fannie Lou Hamer, literally one of 20 children of sharecroppers, who was so upset by the treatment of Black folks that she decided she would devote her life to making it change. And the iconic picture that we used of her was literally of when she was almost beaten to death for trying to register Black people to vote. I did not gain suffrage by anything that happened in 1920. I have the right to vote because of Shirley Chisholm and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And then there's Muhammad Ali, who I knew personally and adored. And his story is amazing because he literally changed the way people, changed the way people see religion. But most important, thanks to taking his case to the Supreme Court, because he refused to be sent to Vietnam to fight a war that he thought was unjust, he changed the way people saw war. So I'm going to read you just a little excerpt just from the story about Muhammad Ali, which you heard a little bit from Brenda. Muhammad Ali would grow up to be one of the greatest athletes in history, a man admired for his fight for political freedom as much as for his boxing. But before he was known as the greatest, he was a 12-year-old boy named Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr., growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, and he was the victim of a crime. Someone stole his bicycle. It was October 1954. The first thing he said to all of his friends and anybody who would listen is, I'm going to find whoever did that and I'm going to whoop him. And they said, well, you better go and talk to that guy who's in the basement of that building over there. Well, that guy was a retired police officer who ran a boxing gym. And Muhammad told him what happened. Well, little Cassius told him what happened. He said, well, if you're going to fight somebody, you better learn how to fight. From that day, he became a boxer. Within 6 years, he won the gold medal at the Rome Olympics. And in his lifetime, he was the heavyweight champion of the world 3 times. And it all started from when he was 12 years old. So the question I have to ask is, how else can we also embrace young people? My friend Alice Randall, who is the author of the new book, Black Bottom Saints, she and I have decided that we're going to launch an entire initiative to revive something that we had in Detroit decades ago called the Shutterbug Club. It was a staple of Detroit's Black Bottom neighborhood. It was one of those neighborhoods that, you know, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot. they literally paved over this amazing Black residential and business mecca so they could build an Interstate 75. But before that, this Shutterbug Club, their members took photographs that were exhibited at the world famous Gotham Hotel, which was also bulldozed. But what we want people to do is draw inspiration from Alice's book, Black Bottom Saints, which recounts the lives of real Detroiters who she has labeled as saints. Or they can be inspired by the icons in my book that they lived, African Americans who changed the world. Or they can be inspired by any hero that their family knows that has something to do with what they believe or where they live. We want children with their parents' help to take photos of each other dressed as iconic figures for a national exhibit to be held in conjunction with Detroit's own Source Booksellers, a Black-owned bookstore, in October. But what we mostly want to do is for Halloween, have people dressed up like famous, important people instead of ghosts and goblins. That formal announcement is coming in June. But I can tell you, in her book, she described, for instance, Lynette Dobbins Taylor, who was an amazing political figure and the first African-American woman to dance with an American president. She actually danced at a ball with Lyndon Johnson. So imagine a little girl imagining herself as Lynette Dobbins Taylor, who was a political force and who should be known. Or Maxine Powell. Maxine Powell, some people have heard about, was a part of the triumvirate of people who helped train Motown stars. There was Charlie Atkins, who taught them how to dance, and Berry Gordy, who taught them how to sing. She taught them how to be. She taught them etiquette. She taught them how to uh, present themselves in public. She taught them how to speak, not to slouch. And she taught me how to get properly into a car. So imagine a little girl as Maxine Powell, embodying the spirit of that powerful woman who was this big, but was this big. I loved her, and she should be known by people around the country. And finally, there's my friend, Caller Walker Miller. She's the CEO of Walker Miller Energy Services. She found someone in energy. Alice Parker, literally, everybody should know this. She was really not happy with the poor heat in her home in Newark, New Jersey. So she literally invented the internal heating system that used ductwork so that you didn't have to use a coal-fired system or a fireplace, but you could use gas and heat your whole house. And she got the patent for that in 1919, 1 year before most American women got the right to vote, and years before the civil rights movement. So who else might be someone? What child might be Mary Fields, known as Stagecoach Mary, the first African-American female star route mail carrier in the United States? Yes, mail was important enough that they had to carry a shotgun. So my goal is for young people of all colors and all sizes to know that there was a history of African Americans in this world, in this country, that was bigger, that was more important than just being enslaved. And we can do that. We can change the curriculums, we can change the narrative, and we can change race relations in America just by properly telling our story, changing the narrative, and making people glad that they lived, that these folks lived. So thank you so much. And I look forward to my conversation with Brenda because I think she's awesome.
Thank you, Rochelle. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I love the call to action that you ended with for people to dress up. And it actually has inspired what is my first question, which is I'm curious as to who you now or who you as a child might have chosen to dress up as.
Oh my God. As a child, I literally would have picked Ida B. Wells. As a woman, I would have picked Ida B. Wells. I've been a writer since I was 8 years old. I just had to figure out how to make a living doing it. And growing up in my little town of Tarboro, North Carolina, we had one high school, one English class for our junior year. And thank God that English teacher, a woman named Jean Harris, convinced the principal one year to let her add an elective called journalism. And she held up this book, News Writing 101. And I went, oh my God, that's how I can make a living as a writer, which I needed to do because I had no math skills and I wanted to write all the time. So Ida B. Wells.
Thank you. The first person who came to me was Maya Angelou. One of the other gifts my mom gave me was we read all of those books, all and her poetry. And so yeah.
You know why the cage bird sings. So
yes,
yeah.
Indeed. So this is the start of our Q&A. So we invite folks to share questions that they have. And until they do, I have a few questions of my own and some on behalf of some of the people who I shared gratitude for. So my son wanted me to ask when we were talking about Muhammad Ali, and he caught the part where you referenced yourself, like towards the end of the story, you talked about and he was like, wait, did she met him? And I was like, I think she did. And his question was, wow, I wonder what that was like. I wonder what it was like to have a conversation with someone like Muhammad Ali. What was that like for you?
I'll tell you a couple of secret stories just for your son. So I was a columnist at the Louisville Courier Journal. Louisville, Kentucky is his hometown. And for my first column, and I things just work out. It was the universe, it was God, but I decided to write about Muhammad Ali and chastise the city for not having something there to honor him. His name wasn't at the airport. There was no museum. There was no, he was just a regular guy when he was the most famous person in the world. Everybody knows him. So I wrote a column chastising the city and, saying that we needed to do something, which is something his family and supporters have been trying to do for years. And the mayor of the city happened to be at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. And he called me up after reading the column and said, you're right, we have to do something, we're gonna do this. And so I got a front page story after the first column saying the mayor says we're gonna do something. So from that point, I began to write about those efforts to raise the money to get the museum done. I got to hang out with him and his lovely wife, Lonnie. I was one of the first people to come to Berrien Springs, Michigan, to his farm where he used to live and where he trained as a boxer. And I'll tell you, this is for your son. Every time, well, the one time that I went, but every time we were together, he would do this. But I was in the house, in Muhammad Ali's house, so I still, get giddy thinking about it. And I was walking from the kitchen to the family room where we were doing interviews. And I walked past the laundry room and he had this thing he could do with his fingers. It was this loud cricket sound. His hands were so strong. I don't know what it was, but I was not paying attention. He did that behind my ear and I jumped 6 feet. He used to play the worst practical jokes. I mean, it was just stunning. But the other secret thing that I've never written about is when this was one of the Tyson Holyfield fights. I won't say which one. We were sitting in the basement of his mother-in-law's home watching that fight. And I said, I am sitting in the basement. Muhammad Ali is sitting on the couch eating a bowl of vanilla ice cream, watching the Tyson Holyfield fight. And when the fight was over and we were leaving, he'd had a great day. I mean, just, with Parkinson's, there's some days that are better than others. So we're walking from the basement up through the kitchen so we can go outside to get in the car. And he said something to me that was as clear as if it had been like 1970, scared the heck out of me because it was just totally like him. And I just wanted to like tape it or tell somebody, did you hear that? And so I have that moment always to remember that, he was always himself and he was always who he would be. And it was just one of the greatest honors of my life to write about him. So yes, I did meet him. So I slipped that little bit in there so people would know that some of that came from me knowing him. But the story about his bike is pretty well known, but it is literally that defining moment, which is why I chose that. I chose different stories for each one after researching them, but that one was easy.
Thank you for that. I'm sure I hope my son's listening today, but I'll connect with him later to see what he thinks about that. Speaking of sons, I want to talk about your grandson. So what did he say when you asked him to be a part of this project? And then when it was all done and you showed him the book, like, what did he think?
I don't think he really grasped how great it was. See, he likes to travel. We have a big map in my home that has our pins for all the places we've been. I'm red, he's blue. There are hundreds of red ones. There's about maybe a dozen blue ones, and he's trying to catch up with me. He was excited about being able to go to Seattle, like, oh, we're going to Washington. But when we got there and then we started, Christy has this amazing way. And I have to tell you, the reason she's not here is because she does not do publicity. And I promised I would stop asking her. I have to do this tour alone because she's not going to do it. She says hi. But she has this amazing ability to just, with great fun and great verve, just get the kids into this, even as she's applying makeup and talking to them about what they're doing. And I'm talking about the story. And he just got right into it, sort of the way Lola did. But we also used bribery because for every half an hour photo shoot, he got to do 15 minutes of Fortnite. So he was fine. But during it, you know, he actually got how important it was, and he saw that we were doing these things for these famous people. But the most important reaction was I didn't send the whole book, but I sent the first 3 chapters of The Galley. And I told his mom, I said, just let him read it. Don't say anything. And then you tell me what he looks like. And she said, he is not moving. He is just really like into it. And I said, okay, now I'll call him. So I called and he said, Avi, which is what he calls me because there's no such thing as the G word in my family.
Mm.
Avi, this is great. Oh my God. And I went, really? You're really reading it? You're really liking it? He said, yes, this is awesome. That's better than any award, better than, you know, the academic, and it's getting great accolades, but that made my day because it meant that someone his age, you know, for whom it was done, really gets it.
Yes, yes. As I shared in my introduction, I felt the same way. My boy ran right in like, "Did you know?" Like, "Oh, well, tell me, tell me what I didn't know. I don't know." So yes, I'm so glad that he reacted that way. What a gift for you and for him to have done that together. We have a question from our audience about suggestions on the best way to incorporate your book into kindergarten curriculum and lesson plans. So messages for teachers. How would you encourage teachers to use this as a part of a curriculum?
Well, I am working on a curriculum guide right now because what has needed to happen for centuries was to make sure that this history was incorporated into American history instead of separated out to be, you know, celebrated or talked about during the shortest month of the year. So what I'm doing is working on something that shows these things and these people where they go, where they belong. And I'm hoping that we get this done so that it can become something that can be in every public school in America. That's
Mhm,
my dream. That's been my dream for 10 years to teach one America, one history.
mhm. That is a big dream. And even the way that question was framed, right, about how a teacher could incorporate that. We have individual educators out there doing heroic work, trying to change the narrative, tell, bigger, fuller stories about the lives of everyone who lived in the United States from its very beginning and even before it was the United States and all of that. But sometimes there's a big wall for districts. Do you have any thoughts about how you would convince school boards and districts to adopt, one American history?
Well, I can tell you it's going to be easier now than it has ever been before, thanks to George Floyd. His unwilling sacrifice and the fact that that woke up the world and people are paying attention now. I can tell you, I have never seen so many people who deserve promoting being promoted now. So many people asking about things that they did not care about before, people reading books that did not read before. I think we finally have an opportunity. I'm calling this the second revolution. Crispus Attucks was the first to die in 1776, and he was African American. George Floyd is the first casualty of this revolution. And now that people are paying attention, this is when we need to do it. This is why it has to happen now. I'm hoping that this curriculum will act like a second 1619 curriculum, like the 1619 project that my friend Nicole Hannah Jones did, who wrote the foreword for The Burden and who is busy now making sure that people get this. I want us to have people understand that we can no longer hide from or ignore this amazing history that we have hidden. I mean, the whole American narrative has been a myth, and we have acted like that's the only story, like it's literally as true as Columbus discovering America in 1492. Like it was just there by itself until he got there. We have to change that narrative so that it's complete. So I'm working on the complete story. America was founded in 1619, the minute it had free labor to build a country. It was ratified in 1776. I hope that we now in 2021 can tell the entire story of America and begin doing that all the time, which means in textbooks, classrooms. I really want to thank all of the teachers who all, I mean, all underpaid and underserved for those who do try to incorporate Black history into American history. But we will survive and make progress and succeed when we're no longer talking about Black history. Black history is not going to be a thing. American history will have all of the history in it.
Yes, yes. And as I was listening to you, I kept thinking about the messages in the stories, as well as what you're talking about right now. It's a cycle of getting knocked down and then getting back up, right? Being resilient, persevering, deciding that you can see the end and you're just going to keep pushing forward until you get there. But resilience is exhausting. right? It's exhausting for the people who are fighting for it. It's exhausting for the people who are championing those people and being allies. Um, what advice would you give, particularly to young people, because they are out in front in a lot of ways right now in this movement? What advice would you give them to stay resilient in those moments when they feel like they're getting knocked back down and they're trying to decide how many more times they can get back up?
Well, the two most important things, first and foremost, is don't believe the myth.
Mhm.
Don't accept the narrative. Do not think for a second that you are less than, second class, not as smart. None of those things are true. And everything that we can do to show them that that has never been true is important. And the second thing is to be a little arrogant. If you are smarter than or better than the folks around you, do not act like you're not because you think it might make somebody feel bad. I have seen kids who defer to other kids because they have more money, their parents are senators, that they're treated differently. If you're the smartest kid in the room, own that, be that. You know, it's okay to be a little arrogant. And I know people think, oh my, that's not the right thing to do. But I can tell you the kids that I mentor who are not kids now, and I tell them that it has served them well because people treat you the way you act. It is not what people call you, it's what you answer to. Don't
Mm.
let ever make you think that you are not the baddest person in the room. Because if you walk in like that, do you know how many mediocre people walk into a room like that and they take over, they get jobs, they run stuff when they are literally the last person who needs to do it? Own it, be it.
Oh my gosh, I just had to pause and write that down. It's not what people call you, it's what you answer to.
That's not from
Yes.
Google it so you can find out who said it. I use it all the time, but it's not original to me, and neither is this. There's a third bit of advice to remember to keep the main thing the main thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That was Stephen Covey, but James Carville used to say it all the time. Folks get sort of distracted by minutia. You know, if you are on a path and you're trying to do something and somebody's going to distract you with something little over there, don't let them do that. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That's why I had the career that I wanted and stayed in journalism because that's all I focused on. Now that I finished my journalism career, I am focused on this. Arts and culture for the city of Detroit as well, but this, we cannot continue to let our kids be miseducated. All kids be miseducated.
Yes. And speaking of your career as a journalist and a writer, you are inspiring and you have brought out people who want to be writers and who are writers themselves. And so we have a question in the chat about that. How does a person find their voice when telling stories about our history, as well as keeping it engaging for all readers?
Every column I wrote like I was writing it to my grandmother. And if I finished that column and I read it out loud and I could see her face going, I don't know about that, then that was not right. Or if I could see her saying, yeah, baby, that's good. Find that person, whether it's your mom, your best friend, a teacher, have them in your head. And sometimes every now and again, call somebody and read them a paragraph. I still do that now where I might be working on something. I have an accountability coach. We help each other every week where we have a short meeting to talk about what we're doing. And we sort of keep each other honest about our goals and our progress on things. And I'll read something to her and she'll say, oh, I think that could be a little better. And I know you have it in you. And I'll do the same thing. And it has helped us tremendously. So find your voice by using that actual voice, like you're talking to someone. If you write something and you can't read it out loud, it's not there. I don't care whether it's a chapter in a book or a paragraph or a poem.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a lot of aspiring writers at Seattle Girls School, which is the school where I work, and they often ask for advice, right? As a young writer, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what piece of advice would you give yourself as a young writer?
Make sure that you're responsible for your own education. The most disheartening thing for me, and I don't know that it's every public school, but I know the public schools in Michigan, or at least my daughter's public school, stopped teaching English. And when I say English, I mean English grammar and writing. They would do literature and then let them write things that they felt. My daughter brought home this paper. She's going to kill me, but years ago, and she got an A. And I looked at it, I went, there's misspellings. There's some grammar that's not quite right. Here's a point that you could have made better. She said, oh no, they don't care about things like that. They just want to hear your feelings and your expression about what we read. And I went, oh no. And she went, oh God, no, don't go to the school. Yes, I did. Call the teacher. And I met with her and I said, there's not English grammar going on. You know, when I was taught English, we diagrammed sentences, we learned nouns and verbs and the best way to express ourselves. And they said, well, no, our focus now is on literature, and we want them to understand what they're reading and be able to critique. I said, how are they going to critique it if they can't tell you? I'm happy to help you grade papers. And she said, oh, no, 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 this is how we're going to do it. So of course, my daughter had 2 English classes because my English class where we're going to write in a way that makes sense. And then she had the English class with her teacher who just cared what she had to say. We have got to change that. And if we don't change that, then we as parents have to make sure that we do it. And if you're a parent who's got 2 jobs and doesn't have time, find a tutor. There are plenty of retired English teachers who will help you, but we have got to make sure that we're teaching our kids how to communicate, because in this day and age where everything is a text and a tweet and you know, abbreviations, my daughter used to send me a text, and after about 3 or 4 minutes, she would just call. She said, I know you are writing some grammatically correct sentence. Get here in 10 minutes. What you tell me? I said, yeah, but I made you call, didn't I? U for Y-O-U. Have to be periods, semicolons if they're too, you know, yeah, the whole works. That's how you teach people to stop texting you.
Love that. The first time my son, who he does not have a smartphone, he has what he calls a dumb phone because he's only 11. He doesn't need an iPhone. That's my personal opinion as a parent and an educator. Our children don't need iPhones until they can drive. Okay, I'm gonna step off that, step back down off that stool. But the first time he texted me from upstairs, I said, boy, if you texted me from upstairs, come downstairs and talk to me if you have a question. But you just said something really important in terms of parents feeling empowered to teach their kids what they're not learning in school. That has been a part of the story of Black parents, parents of color in general, forever, right? And sometimes it feels overwhelming, and it feels like you don't know if you have the right resources or how to connect to the things that are going to help your kid learn, particularly when it comes to understanding our own culture and history. Obviously, this book is now an offering from you and Christy for that purpose. Are there other things that you would suggest to parents who are trying to make sure that their Black children have a well-rounded education in Black history and culture and empowerment, and not just the story of us as slaves, former slaves?
I think one of the first things that they have to do is work with the teachers they have. One of the most amazing things that happened, you know, I moderate panels and give keynote speeches. And I did this panel where this man stood up. It was a predominantly white school district, and this Black man stood up and he said, how can I get my son's teachers, who are all white, to pay attention to his history and understand what he needs? And he was just talking about just the hard time he was having. And this psychologist who was on the panel with us, and she's African American, she said, well, first of all, I need to tell you that you're insane. And I thought, oh God, how am I going to moderate this? But she continued. She said, every year, millions of parents turn over their precious cargo to people they don't know, that they haven't vetted, that they're not sure how they feel about Black kids. And then we just, you know, move on. We have to stop doing that. Make sure we know what they're doing, know what they're teaching. As soon as she said that, I went, oh my God, she's right. I remember when my daughter was in 4th grade and she was in this advanced English class, and the teacher gave them a test, and it literally was one of those vocabulary tests where she'd give them the word and they'd spell it and define it. And it was just 10 words. So, you know, you miss one, you got a 90. So she won. And I said, why didn't you get 100? And she said, well, I missed this one. I said, well, that's quiche. We have that for brunch almost every Sunday at La Madeleine. What happened? She said, you mean the egg pie? Well, why didn't they just call it egg pie? And I said, well, I don't know, but honey, it's called quiche. So she said, well, it doesn't matter, because the teacher said that, you know, because I'm a minority, I don't really have to work that hard. I said, excuse me? She said, what? So I took the next day off so I could be the room parent, so I could have a discussion with that teacher about how she better not ever say that to any child, including mine or anyone else in this class or in this school or in her lifetime, because not only was it wrong, but it showed that she didn't have any idea of the accomplishments these kids could make. And then I said all that. I never heard that again from her. I don't know how many teachers she told about what had happened in case they thought I might come to their classroom, but that's what we have to do. We have to be mindful. We have to be, you know, there are still, even amongst the most amazing teachers who give their lives to this most sacred profession, who don't need to be there. I don't know why they started, but whatever happened, they just decided, oh Lord, these children are getting on my nerves and these little Black kids are really getting on my nerves. That's when it's time for you to leave and go do something else. I don't know what, because it shouldn't have anything to do with children. But we have to watch out for that and make sure that that's not happening and just be as involved as we can be. And if you're swamped, then form a little collective with parents and make sure that you're checking in with book clubs, African American book clubs, where they can give you book lists of the things that they're reading. So if you are working 2 jobs, but your friend is working 1 job, okay, so every Saturday, can you have a reading time with all the kids where they can read this book? And then I'll give them the test on Sunday when I'm off. Work together. We have to do that. It's one thing that we as African Americans don't do enough, and we got to start doing that.
I want to echo that message as a school leader.
Yeah.
It's hard in those moments when parents come in and say, I need to call something out here. But that's what partnership is, right? And we learn from those parents when they come in and say, I need you to do better. I can see what you were trying to do. Here's how it fell short. And here's how I can support so it can be better next time. That's how schools get better. That's how communities get better. And just schools are microcosms of the bigger world, and the people, the adults in those schools are on a spectrum just like our kids are, right? With some of them who are deeply embedded and doing their own work so that they can show up and hold space for kids, and some who are at the beginning of that journey, and some who don't understand why it matters, right? The
Yeah.
whole spectrum is present. And so as parents, definitely need to go in and have those conversations with
I do want to say for that teacher, I didn't go in and hover over her and carry a stick. I tried to make it as much a Claire Huxtable moment as a partnership moment. So she would know I'm doing this to save you from somebody else who might come in here and not be this nice about it, but also because it's the right thing to do. And she really just hadn't even thought about it. She thought she was doing something right and had no idea that that might make somebody lazier or work less. So it worked, but you have to really work at it and treat it like a partnership, because you have to be in partnership with your children's teachers.
Yes. We just got one more question in the chat, which is about how we tell our stories. The question reads, we need more books that tell our stories. Do you have pointers for getting our books published? Which is definitely, there's a gatekeeping that happens there at the publishing, right?
Well, first of all, I'm writing as fast as I can, because even though Christy didn't want to do more of those, I think I am going to do more. And I'm also doing a sequel to The Burden called Laying the Burden Down, because out of those 80 conversations, I learned so much about what to do. You can't tell people how this has affected without talking about how you can help fix it. So I'm doing that. But this is the most important thing. And this is what I tell people all the time. Do not look for the folks. You know what? I'm going to read this little bit. We've got just a little bit of time. This is from The Burden, and this is from my essay. Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote a brilliant foreword, so I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't write an essay, but I wrote this. The scene is seared into my memory. Red, just paroled from Shawshank Prison, works as a bag boy at a local grocer. He packs a sack for a customer, then raises his hand. Restroom break, boss? His white supervisor calls him over. You don't need to ask me every time you need to. Your kid's on the line, so you know what he said. Just go, understand? Red nods quickly, goes to the men's room, and as he stands over the urinal, his words and voiceover hang in the air. 40 years I've been asking permission to go. I can't squeeze a drop without say so. That is what being enslaved did to a people. There are thousands of examples in written history that detail the physical brutality of slavery. But what America must pay more attention to is the emotional brutality that boils down to a single post-slavery word: permission. Permission to speak, permission to vote, permission to work in jobs that allow us to use all of our talents, permission to drink from community water fountains, permission to dine at public lunch counters, permission to sit anywhere on public buses that our tax dollars fund, permission to provide our children with educations equal to those of their white peers, permission to embrace the freedom the Emancipation Proclamation lied about, permission to run for the presidency of the United States of America. We African Americans in the United States have spent a century and a half seeking permission, hiding our lights under bushels, accepting less than we deserve because we've been trained to believe we don't deserve more. It is time to put that burden down. That applies to publishing. Do not go after the big publishers and folks who either don't understand our story or aren't interested in our story. There are Black publishers, and I went the route of a university publisher, first of all, because they want those stories, they want great books, and second, because people don't always think of them. Wayne State University Press has been a blessing to me. And quite frankly, they took the burden without my even having to write a book proposal. I told them what it was going to be about and what I would do. So when it was time for that, they took it without a book proposal. I'm not suggesting you don't write one. I'm just saying I was lucky because, they knew I was a writer. They've been reading my columns. But why would I try to go and ask, one of the big publishers, can you please look at this and hope 6 months later somebody will say maybe, when you might have somebody right in your area who can do that. And then there's always Black publishers and self-publishing. Self-publishing is the least desirable because if you publish it yourself, people think it's because nobody else would. But that's not the case. If you've got something really good, Elin Harris published his books and sold them out of the trunk of his car, and a publisher said, oh, these are good, and took it over. Find a way to be heard. Don't wait and don't be discouraged, and don't let a no be a no.
Don't let a no be a no. So my last question for you is about your own story and your own message, right? So of course, every story in this book ends with you sharing a message for folks to hold on to at the end of it. I'm curious what message you would write for your own story if your story were in this book.
She charted her own path and never regretted it.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm going to step back and let you make any closing remarks that you want before Lanisha comes back on to close us out. I really enjoyed this time with you. Thank you for this book. Thank you, Christy, if you're on the line. Appreciate all that you do to elevate the voices and the stories of Black people in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to thank the museum again, which is one of my favorite places I visited when I was in Seattle. Everyone who's anywhere on the West Coast, you need to go up and take a look at it. It's fantastic. I want to thank you for being an educator because, Brenda, we need educators now more than ever. And I want to thank literally every parent who decides that they're going to be a part of their child's education, whether they can do it personally or they partner with someone else. We have got to be as responsible as we can be for what our children soak in. They're little sponges, and we need to make sure we're providing some of that water. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Rochelle and Brenda. That they lived. Thank you so much to the both of you. This has been a most remarkable afternoon, and we are so grateful for the eye-opening, rejuvenating, inspirational conversation we just listened to. We needed this conversation today to lift up our ancestors, to lift up ourselves, and to lift up our young people. And to hear it from this dynamic duo, the two of you, the writer who educates and the educator who writes. Rochelle Riley, thank you. Thank you for the book. Thank you for today's conversation, for being with our Seattle region today. And thank you for your commitment to being a writer warrior. We thank Christy Smith-Jones, and we thank little Lola and little Caleb. Thank you, little Lola, little Caleb, and Brenda Lees. Beautiful moderation of this conversation. Beautiful moderator. We are so grateful for the questions, for the insights, for giving us what you all gave us today. If you all viewing are not experiencing joy right now, this has been a joyful program to see little Lola and little Caleb mirroring their ancestors. Our young people are our heroes in this book. So please get a copy of the book for yourselves and for the young people in your lives. It can be found on Rochelle Riley's webpage, which is RochelleRiley.com. Today's conversation is to be continued in your homes, in your schools, in your workplaces, until we become all that they were and all that we can be. Let's continue this conversation. We thank you all for tuning in. We thank our NAM volunteers and we thank the Town Hall Seattle team. And we are now ready for Women's History Month. Based on the conversation we just experienced over this last hour, we're ready. We're ready for March. And so NAM invites you all to join us on March 13th. We will be partnering with the Pacific Science Center and having a conversation about COVID, vaccinations, and race. We will be in dialogue with Dr. Ben Danielson, Dr. John Vassell, and other leading Black medical professionals of our area. We also invite you to join us on March 20th. NAM will be in partnership with the Seattle Opera in presenting our drive-in Black Opera movie concert at the Museum of Flight. Tickets are available through NAM's website. And we invite you to join us on March 28th, 1 month from today. We will be in conversation with Alelia Bundles, the great-granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, as part of NAM's Descendants series program. Here at the Northwest African American Museum, we believe in changing our community, our region, the nation, and the world through anti-racist education, inclusive history, and the power of the Black arts. Catch us around town at our various Knowledge is Power books and soccer balls giveaway pop-ups. There is truly something for everyone at NAM during this year of excellence and resilience. We are here for you, and together we are community. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.